The Badgers are about to have a new offensive coordinator. Will Jeff Grimes help restore Wisconsin's identity, or will it be another and the last failed experiment for Luke Fickell? I'm Rajiv. He's Justin. Here we go.
Welcome to the Bucky Report, your destination for all things Wisconsin Badgers. Authentic takes.
Oh my God.
Game analysis.
Touchdown Badgers! Ring one up!
And discussion from the fan perspective.
Woo-hoo!
Thanks for joining us and on Wisconsin.
Welcome to the Bucky Report. We are your hosts, Rajiv and Justin, back together on a Sunday to talk about all things Wisconsin Badgers. On today's show, the Badgers are soon to make official the hiring of Kansas offensive coordinator Jeff Grimes to hold the same position in Madison. We'll tell you what we think about the hire and go into some details on what scheme we should expect to see in 2025. Will this return Wisconsin to its Barry Alvarez roots? Gard's team suffered their second consecutive loss after a turnover-filled afternoon in downtown Milwaukee. Can this defense be good enough to compete in the Big Ten? We'll also touch on some end-of-season grades for the football team if time permits us today. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. You can find our show on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what we're doing, hit the subscribe button so you know when we make new content. Justin, interesting week for the Wisconsin Badger football team. We got so much to get into. How are you today? How are you feeling?
I'm good. I'm honestly, having kind of dove into Grimes, I'm pretty excited about him. I don't think he's a flashy guy, but I think when you look at the scheme and everything, there's a lot to like about what he does, and I think it's a lot of what Luke Fickell was really hoping for with Longo.
Yeah, I also agree with you. So let's do this. We're going to talk big picture thoughts first, and we're going to kind of dive in a little bit more. Justin, we both watched some film on him. We'll talk about some of the schemes, some of the things we like and don't like maybe, and how we really think it's going to work for us. But so big picture for me, and I tweeted this the other day, and I was literally, as soon as the news kind of broke, I did a quick little research on him, and then I've subsequently done more. I really like this hire a lot. And here's the reason. It basically, simply put, as I've said many times, we've been a high floor team for a long time. That's not here anymore. Having just had a 5-7 season, lost the bowl streak, that's a mess. Obviously, our identity has been predicated on the run game, right? We've always had that. We've always had great offensive lines. And what this hire says to me is we can go back to being a high floor team. Does that mean it's going to be amazing, great offense? No, but it means that when you use what we have and what we do best, which is offensive line, and look at the last two classes, so clearly that's going to continue. When you utilize that strength, it puts us in a position where we don't have to have the greatest quarterback. I'm not saying we shouldn't go out and get those guys, but we don't have to have an amazing quarterback for us to be successful. We need to be bigger on defense, which Luke Fickell has said that's clearly a focus of his. And we need to be able to have an identity, run the ball, and be a high floor type offense. That's what this brings us. And then you couple that with this staff's ability to get high quality athletes, which we've again seen for now 2 classes in a row. We have Carter Smith coming here. That's a big deal. So then when you get that flashy good quarterback, i.e. the Russell Wilson year, you can have major success. Yes. That's all I want. I want to be a high floor team that can win 7 or 8 games at minimum. And then if we have a great year, we're in that 12-team playoff instead of seeing 4 other freaking Big Ten teams in there and us not being one of them. I like this hire, Justin. I think this really does give me good vibes about pushing things back into the program, letting us be what we are. I like it, man. Give me your big picture takeaways.
Sure. I called it when it happened. He's an Andy Ludwig hire. And there's a huge segment of the Wisconsin fan base, for whatever reason, like has a revisionist history of him as a offensive coordinator. The guy's responsible for 2 of our highest scoring years in Wisconsin history. He's a guy with an extremely high floor, and there's enough creativity and flash in his scheme to cause problems for teams. So if you give him some quality talent, he can definitely scheme things up and cause problems for a team. And I'm talking anybody. Like, I saw some of the things he did with Kansas. There were players that the quarterback wasn't great to start the year, but when I watched the creativity and things that he did, you could see how easily he was able to scheme things open, whether it be open receivers or just in the run game, creating issues with the defense, kind of putting them in flux. A lot of QB run, speed option, stuff like that. But there's a lot of things they do that you don't. It's a little bit more unconventional than what we're used to.
Yeah.
It's stuff that's been in football for forever, but he does RPO. I mean, it's kind of exactly what I think Fickell truly wanted, and that Longo just had a different perspective on. But the run game is far more diverse.
Yeah, and that's certainly one thing that we'll talk a lot about is the run game, because it was a struggle for us, and we don't generally struggle at running the football, but when we do, it looks bad, and our entire team looks bad, which is not good. We've started a lot of questions already. Kevin Brown, I see that question for Justin. I've already started. We'll get back to that for sure. So get your questions in the chat if you want us to answer some things or just kind of things you want us to talk about. But let's dive into this a little bit more, Justin. You've watched some of the Illinois game from last year. I've watched some other videos on YouTube and some of his film from last year as well. There's a lot of stuff out there. He's a guy that brings a system that's a bit more familiar to us, and a bit more, like zone run, all kind of good stuff like that. And we're going to talk about that. So let's start here. What are some things that, after watching the film that you did, what are some specific things that you like about what you see from Jeff Grimes?
Well, he does a lot with the QB run game. I mean, he definitely puts pressure on the defense with it. And when I say that, I'm talking design runs for the quarterback, option play. He absolutely puts into his offense. There's going to be option. This is going to be a tough offense for Braden. I mean, I'm not going to say Braden Locke can't run it, but if we want to run to the ceiling of what this offense is, you want somebody who's athletic out there.
It's okay. Just say it. He can't run it. It's okay.
He can't run it remotely to the level that we want. And that's because there's a lot of run game type stuff where the quarterback keeps it and can break it, and it breaks for big yardage. There's a lot of creativity in terms of screen work in his offense, that whether it be tight end, wide receiver, running back, he does all sorts of interesting stuff with that. He's definitely moves his offensive lineman around. There's a play in the game I was watching against Illinois where they went wildcat and put the quarterback in the out at wide receiver and had him come in motion, take the handoff from the running back and throw the football. So he's very creative with what he does. They do a lot of like orbit motion. Honestly, ton of snap movement, ton of motion in general. He definitely helps his quarterbacks by giving them a kind of an idea of what's going on on defense. So I really like that he kind of helps out with the reads and makes sure that they kind of know what's going on, and also puts pressure on the defense to adjust to whatever movement he's creating. But there's a lot of different formations that he goes with. He's not afraid to throw in some different. There a lot out of the pistol for him. So they're definitely going to be in the gun a lot still, but he's not afraid to go in a variety of different ways if he thinks it can be effective.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see him in 11 personnel, 12 personnel, all kinds of different things out there. 21. I mean, there's different variations of what he does. And one of the things that I liked right away was the zone blocking schemes, wide zone plays, inside zone plays.
Jet
and
sweep is returning.
That's a lot of multiplicity on offense. And it's about that. You mentioned the pre-snap, but it's about like, it's not necessarily option per se. They do have that. They do have some option in there, but the defense has to respect when they're running a lot of running plays out of the jet sweep action. So the jet sweep's there if they want it. They don't have to take it. And that's nice to see, because now the defense has to account for that jet sweep guy, motion guy. And there's definitely some read option there. There's some RPO in it. And I love the run schemes though, and if defenses over pursue, like they've got really good lanes to do that. It requires a lot of good blocking from the wide receivers. That's one thing that's very clear. It requires a lot of good tight end work, right? So we're going to talk about the players and how they fit into this.
I think Acker could have a place in this as being a guy who gets used as kind of the H-back role, because they don't have a traditional fullback when at Kansas, at least. They typically used a tight end that they would flex into the backfield and then use him like a fullback. But I feel like that's what Acker is going to be able to do in this offense, is be able to be a guy who can be split out, and they will use him as a blocker out on pass plays and stuff like that. So
yeah, they definitely do. And from a passing perspective there's a lot of good patterns, a lot of mesh, rub routes, things of that nature, a lot of screenplay. There's tight end screens, there's wide receiver screens. And the thing is, you mentioned already the creativity. The creativity seems to be there, and you can do a lot of different things out of the various formations that he runs. But what he does well is the power run game, again, which is what we need to do well. We have to have that. We have the offensive linemen. We have 2, 3 great running backs that we were excited about in last year's class. Like, we got to use those guys. And now you can take that and you can say, all right, if we've got that great QB, then yes, I understand. Like, there's a couple questions here about QB coach. We're going to talk about that too. Like, I get that we have to have a QB. I understand that. But even if you have a good game manager type QB, because this offense is what it is now, the defense has to get better, but it does raise the floor of what we do because it allows us to use the strengths that we have. How many times last year were we calling for Tretch jet sweeps? I mean, in the Paul Christ offense, we saw jet sweeps all the time, often too much. But we didn't see it hardly at all last year. I think 2 or 3 times the entire season. That even the threat of it being there changes how this offense has to run. He's really intentional about. So he runs a power spread type of an offense. He's really intentional about limiting box defenders, which I really like. Like through motion and through scheme, he's able to say, all right, I'm not going to run with 9 guys in the box. Now he can if he needs to, but he's really good about limiting that with that spread look. And I'm all about getting under center and sometimes have that fullback dive. You need that. But for the most part, I really prefer when you run out of a spread to where you can use your power game, but you don't have 8, 9 men in the box. You're facing a 6-man box. And then if they are facing a heavier box, they'll get out of the play. Right. And that's what I've seen in Grimes' offense. And it's nice to have that, just that multiple look scheme, a lot of things happening, but it does require very heady plays. I mean, the blocking is there. You've got to be really good at blocking. It's not just the linemen, it's the receivers, it's the tight ends, it's the H-back, as you mentioned with Acker. So execution is still going to be the biggest thing. But even without that piece, just looking at scheme, there's a lot of good things to go off of here.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I look at it, one of the things that's, you're talking about the rub routes and stuff like that. These are the type of things that a team like Wisconsin, who doesn't necessarily have high-end wide receiver talent, this is how you get guys open. Like, you find ways to get them in situations where you can create separation just either through deception or getting a guy kind of forcing the defense to have to adjust. And that's what happens in the NFL all the time with rub routes. It's just getting a guy that you're kind of picking a guy to get that couple of yards that you're going to get. And you have to be able to just not sell it and blow the play. But I will say that there's a lot of diversity to this. I'm curious how fast we take off with an offense like this, and also who's going to get to run it. I don't think the guy, listen, I love that it appears Mabry is staying. I don't know whether he'd be ready to run something like this right off the bat. I think you're going to be bringing somebody in that's probably got some experience as a starter, that is a dual threat type guy. Now, I don't know who that would be. I've looked at the portal. There's nobody that really – the only guy that's truly stands out to me with and this is with me not really diving into it at all, would be the quarterback from Oklahoma. I actually think – but that guy's going to be highly sought after. So, but he would fit this offense. He's a very mobile guy. He's a guy who's a quality passer, has good touch on his throws. And it's a type of offense that's kind of similar to what he's done. So he would fit this if that's somebody that they chose to go after or somebody that they can get.
Yeah, who they get at quarterback is going to be absolutely everything. I mean, that's critical. Zach Bard says this is not a Chris Iowa pro style where it's predictable H-back dive under center and a 5-yard hook route. It's getting back to our roots while modernizing it a bit. Time to get a solid QB and win. Yeah, I mean, exactly. I agree with this completely. Justin, so let's talk about what are you certain about? Like with this, with if Jeff Grimes is our new offensive coordinator, when this gets announced and it's happening, what are you certain about for next year?
I feel fairly certain that the run game will be back to a level that we're comfortable with this, because I think that both Blazek, who we already think is a win, but Grimes is also heavily in the as a both run game coordinator and was an offensive line coach, is a guy who truly understands running the football. And I think that that's something that will help us heavily in terms of being able to establish our offense in general and be able to throw out of. He's a lot more play action than what we were seeing with Longo. In Longo's offense, it almost seemed like there was a run scheme and there was a pass scheme. These are very complementary, what he likes to do. So it's going to be things there that you're kind of getting the defense to key on something, thinking that it's going to be a run play or whatever, and then they come out of it and it's a throw. So there's going to be a lot of things that he does. I've seen people say that they don't think that this is an offense that can come from behind. I disagree with that. I think it is he's not afraid to take shots and be aggressive at all. It's one of the things that when I watch Kansas play, there are a lot of shorter throws and safer throws that he does with the wide receiver screens and stuff like that. But he definitely throws the ball down the field when they attack. So that is something that I think that if you get the right quarterback and you can get some wide receiver talent, you'll have an opportunity to attack teams. And it will be a very balanced scheme.
Yeah, and the read options are there for that. Like there's several plays. I've watched some of his BYU time, his Kansas time, his Baylor time, and like they have receivers running routes on the field constantly, right? Or they're running routes where if they have leverage on the cornerback, they're taking it to the corner, they're taking it to the post. Like there is a lot of that. And obviously if Vinny Anthony stays around, that's going to be helpful because we saw what he could do with Braden Locke as his quarterback. So who knows what happens if we get someone better. One thing I'm certain of is that there's going to be more creativity, and watching him at all the places that he's called plays, which is 3 different schools. It was, BYU, Baylor, and Kansas. The creativity is there. And then if you compare that to the creativity that Longo had, and we complained about week after week after week, that's improved. There's no doubt in my mind that the creativity is going to be back. And I agree with you, of course, that our run game is going to be there. Obviously, the biggest thing we've talked about is the players, right? So it's got to have execution. We got to have the players for it. With the roster that it sits now offensively, right? We know that we now have Renfro coming back. We now have Malman coming back on the line. And of course, Brunner has still got years of eligibility left. That's going to be 3 returning offensive linemen. You add in guys like Haywood and Mandel to fill that line, plus the freshmen. There is depth now at line. Obviously, quarterback is the concern. Outside of the quarterback, which we're going to talk about, do you think the offense has the players to be successful with this offense?
I don't think it does right now. I think it can get there by season start. They're going to have to bring in some guys. I don't think there's a ton. Like, I think we all, like anyone that really truly looked deeply into what we did last year, there's more talent there than we were seeing in terms of the results. Because we'd have times where things look cohesive and we would work our way down the field quickly and efficiently. And it's like, man, why can't we just do this more consistently? It's going to require decent quarterback play, which is, to me, is the big key factor. Right now, we don't have that guy that I feel comfortable with saying the offense will be solid. If they can get somebody that is a quality quarterback, and I'm not talking great, I'm talking somebody that is a plus quarterback, not necessarily a star, but a guy who is capable of running the offense efficiently and being able to just not make a lot of stupid mistakes, I think that it will go miles towards this being a much better offense going into this year.
Steve Davis says, sorry, but I don't get this media seeing it as a plus to have so many linemen back against good teams that the line stalled. To play the redshirt freshman, we're just going in circles. What are your thoughts on this, Justin? I'm perfectly okay with having the linemen back because I think we need that depth. But what are your thoughts?
I think number one, one of my fears with those guys returning is this is a scheme that does require a fair amount of athleticism from offensive linemen. So Ryan Herring's joining us here.
Yeah,
this is a scheme that does require a fair amount of athleticism from the offensive line. They do a lot of pulling and a lot of movement, and they do kind of force a defense to adjust. I question whether some of our current offensive linemen are going to have the necessary athleticism for this a little bit.
And I just think worries. And ultimately, I think that like with the 3 guys coming back, like we talked about depth on the offensive line this year, I'm perfectly okay with the fact that they're coming back to add that depth. Ryan Herrings, host of Locked On Badgers, joins us today. Ryan, we were just talking about obviously our thoughts. Give us your big picture thoughts on Grimes. How do you feel about the hire, and where are you on this?
Yeah, I appreciate you having joined in. The Niners are crushing the Bears right now, so I got a couple minutes.
There you go.
And he's happy.
Yeah, they are crushing them. The Bears.
By the way, the Bears in the first half. Sorry for you Bears fans out there. They had 4 yards of offense in the first half. They had more punts than yards. Yikes! Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, I was watching it. So I think big picture, you guys. I don't want to hit on everything you guys did. I was listening kind of in the background because my parents are here too, so I just got a couple minutes. But I agree. Like the running game, I like the creativity. It's going to be more creative. I know you guys were just getting into the pieces we have on the roster. I think the biggest thing is like you're just going to get better quarterback play because you almost have to, and that's going to make everything else look better. Like if Longo just had better quarterback play, people would be like, oh, he was a lot better. I think this is going to look a lot better just because there's better quarterback play. Like so it's not all going to be the Grimes coming in. It's going to be the quarterbacks just has to be better because Locke has been so limiting. And you get better quarterback play, it's going to make any scheme better. So the scheme I think is going to look better next year because I do think we're going to get better quarterback play. On Grimes, the one thing that gives me a tiny bit of pause, and I don't know, I apologize if you guys hit it, is there are some concerns talking to some Baylor fans, some Kansas fans about some play sequencing. There were times he got a little run heavy and then a little pass heavy. I think one of the mistakes I made with Longo was potentially ignoring some of what North Carolina fans said. Right? Mm-hmm. North Carolina fans came in the comments when we hired Longo and said, well, it could work, but listen, there's going to be some red zone issues, and against better teams, it can kind of not work that well. And I feel like we kind of collectively just ignored everything North Carolina fans said, and I don't want to completely ignore some of the criticism that I've heard from Baylor fans and Kansas fans.
So what I'll say, having watched a couple of games, and I have admittedly need to watch more still, the little bit I have watched, one of the things I came away from it was I'm like, he doesn't seem to get too heavy-handed with either. Now, I need to dig into this further, and I also need to take a look at what's actually happening on the field because I think fans get caught into that mindset, and if the quarterback play is ineffective, which early in the season for Kansas, it wasn't effective, I could totally see him getting run heavy in those situations because he's like, I can't trust you to make good decisions, so we're going to lean on what I know we do well. And I think part of what they're saying is like that game against Illinois, there were times when the run game was just flat out gashing Illinois, and he moved away from it to throw the football a little too much. And it's kind of like what we saw with Longo, where suddenly he throws 5 times in a row. It's like we just were averaging like 7 yards a carry. What are we doing here? The run game is very effective in general. I'm hoping that he's going to realize that that's kind of his bread and butter this year because I think it honestly will be. I don't think the receivers are going to be bad, but I look at a team like Kansas and I think people like Wisconsin fans who haven't paid attention to them, their receivers are really good. And Ryan, you watched a couple of games last year with me when they started Kotelnicki and we're like, we were watching during the game. I remember one of them, I think it was TCU. And we're like, the catches these guys are making, there's not a single guy on the Badgers roster that can make these catches. And it's like, there's some really good players. There's NFL guys on Kansas's wide receiver room, and that's going to be the difference between us and next year. Now, there's going to be some things, like we said, with the rub routes and stuff like that, that you didn't see a ton of that with Longo. That is absolutely going to help these guys get some separation. And it's a heavy thing that he likes to do with his play calling. Like that is a big part of it in terms of being able to get guys some deception and get guys open. But we're not going to be like, I don't expect us to be super dynamic in the passing game this year just because I don't think the pieces are necessarily there.
Who do you guys think flourishes on this roster right now? Who flourishes in this system, Ryan? Like, do you think who do you think feels like they're going to be successful? And then conversely, who do you feel like is not going to really have good places in this?
So I think that's a great question. I think it's kind of a two-parter. It's like who does this year and who does this set up for the next 2 or 3 years really well? Like I think Carter Smith is a guy that makes a ton of sense in this system. Yakimelli's actually a guy. Like I don't
totally. If he doesn't leave. And I'm hoping that's part of the discussion that's going on.
Like he's absolutely a guy with this wide zone system where they're just going to let a running back press the hole, make one cut and go. Like Yak, absolutely. Eugene Hilton coming in is going to be a guy that's interesting in this system, bigger receiver who's going to be asked to block a little bit more. Chris Brooks could be a guy who in this type of running scheme where they're going to use some of those receivers to on the edges.
Absolutely, yeah. They come downhill and they you have guys cracking down on defensive ends, so that's perfect for Brooks.
Yep, those guys come to my mind immediately.
Justin, what do you think?
I think Vinny's going to get a shot in this. They're going to take shots in this offense. They absolutely will tack downfield, and I think that's going to bode well for him. He's still going to get those opportunities to go deep. But I think it's a little more diverse of a route tree. I think you're going to see him get more opportunity to run crossers and a lot more stuff. They do a lot of that. And that's something that Wisconsin didn't really do a ton of under Longo. And I think that we're going to see more of it. And this, let's be honest, there's a lot less thinking in this offense. There's probably some pre-snap stuff that you have to look at, but the receivers, for the most part, are going to have more defined routes in this. It's a little bit more rigid in terms of what the expectations of what guys are doing. It's not going to be as free flowing as what the air raid was, which is probably a good thing for what Wisconsin has on its roster.
I feel like I already like this offense with Darian Dupree because not only will Yakimelli do well in those wide zones, so will Dupree because it's designed to put them more in space in a little bit and give them more opportunities to cut and find holes. And the thing is, we have the line for it, right? I think all the linemen are really tailor-made for this. I think that's going to be really good. But yeah, the receivers, Vinny Anthony, I also love that they take shots. And I think a lot of people are going to think, oh, we're not going to take the shots. We absolutely will take the shots. And I think as long as Vinny Anthony stays on this team, there's going to be a lot for him. And I also think that we got really slot happy. We were obviously big with Pauling and with Tretch. I think that, Barry Johnson is going to be coming in and be a part of this thing next year. And I hope he can kind of grow because the slot plays a big role in this as well. They run a lot of different mesh concepts. And I think that all those slot guys are still going to have a really big part of this in the system. We got a couple questions here. Brad Klippel says, I love this hire. Any word on a QB coach? So what are your guys' thoughts on this? We obviously need to get a QB coach. Ryan, have you heard anything about particular guys or what kind of guy are you looking that you think will target?
I haven't heard anything specifically. I know Curtis dropped a name, and he's going to kill me. I already forgot it. But you're looking for, I think, someone with OSU, maybe an OSU connection, maybe somebody there that is young. I think, to me, the thing with Grimes is he's a great piece in an offensive architecture. But now you also need that quarterback piece with it. Whereas, sorry, my son is coming down. I apologize. Whereas as Phil Longo was the entire thing, Grimes is just a piece. Now you got to complement that piece with another piece. And I'm so sorry. And I think what you're looking for there is what complements Grimes best. It's a younger piece, somebody who's a little more dynamic, up and coming. I think you want to add that element to the room. So that's where I would look. Someone who's going to recruit quarterbacks, relate to quarterbacks, maybe as a connection with his coaching staff. But I don't know who that would be. But listen, this hire isn't going to work without that happening, right?
Dude,
you need both these pieces to come together for this offense to work. And I'm going to go on mute now. I apologize.
Yeah. Justin, we were talking about this a little bit before the show, but I know there's talking, he mentioned the OSU connection or something we were talking about potentially someone like Gino. Do you feel like he's going to bring his own guy in? All right, no problem, Ryan. Ryan's going to head off. Do you think he's going to bring his own guy, or do you think he should? Because honestly, Justin, I kind of want him to bring his own guy in. I want him to bring in a guy that can match with his system, that can be kind of what he's looking for.
Yeah, I think to me it comes down to if he's got people that he trusts and that he thinks are good, absolutely let him make his own pick. I don't think if he has somebody that he trusts to get the type of quarterback play out of what he's looking for, I want him to have that guy. I think that comes down to a trust factor between Fickell and him. And the way I look at it is, do you really want to force somebody on him that they don't necessarily have a prior relationship? Because I think when we talk about tightest relationship on the coaching staff, that's pretty much it. Is basically quarterback coach and an OC should be in lockstep in terms of what they're looking for out of that position, because it is so instrumental in the success of the offense that I think that you have to give him some level of autonomy in selecting somebody. Now, we'll see what happens there. I think the way I look at this group, we've kind of talked in the Discord a little bit about what do we think people are going to spend on this position. And I look at it and I'm I don't think Wisconsin's going to be chasing after somebody who's a top end quarterback coach unless it's somebody Grimes is attached to that he's like, yeah, I want this guy. He's my guy. So we'll see. It'll be really interesting. I think that this is actually the spot where the recruiting comes into it, is the QB coach. You want to get somebody that you trust that's a good quality QB coach, because if that's the case, then you're going to find somebody that is going to be able to go out there and find you bodies. Obviously, OC is going to always have final say on that, but you want somebody who has that kind of energy and can go out there and recruit.
A lot of talk of Danny O'Brien in the chat, by the way. What are your thoughts on Danny O'Brien? I mean, I don't know about that one, but yeah, Tyler Schieber actually put up there. Danny O'Brien, former Badger, as QB coach at PSU. Any former players you'd want? Look, I think the most important thing is there's, like you said, gelling with Fickell and gelling with Grimes. And I think that you brought up an interesting thing about the recruiting, especially. The recruiting piece of it means that Fickell is going to be more involved, obviously, just because we have a recruiting standard now that we got to keep here. And again, I talked about the high floor of the system, but it takes off with a QB like a Carter Smith. To be fair, they've got Mabry and Carter Smith the last couple of years. That's pretty good. Carter Smith, obviously the second highest recruit we've ever had at the position, other than Graham Mertz. So you got to think that adds a lot to it and can be special. So, but I think the most important thing is that it's Fickell and Grimes work together on this and find a guy, because we definitely need that. And as Ryan said before he left, it's just a piece, and we've got to complete that staff and really be there. Along the same lines of who's QB coach, we talked a little bit about QB. What other positions do you feel like are needed on this offense? We're talking obviously more about offense today. Like, as far as from the transfer portal, I'm thinking, another wide out, especially an outside guy potentially. But what do you feel like is needed? Tight end, surely, right?
Yeah, I mean, it will be really interesting with the wide receiver room with Griffin. If he's actually a piece that they like. Obviously, he didn't play much this year, or he didn't play at all this year because he had the issues with his transfer. I'm curious if he's a guy that they view as a viable piece. If that's the case, they may not hit the portal for a wide receiver. Because I think they're probably going to feel okay with Kyan Barry-Johnson and Pauling at the slot position. And you probably feel solid with Vinny on one side. Now the question will come down to who do you feel like can play at that other spot. Tight end, I could see them absolutely going for somebody who is a more established person. That's probably the position that I would say is very likely. They just need a body there that can be consistently productive, and that would be a huge for them.
Yeah, Zach Bart says, I'd love a dominant tight end on something like a mesh route. Yeah, so tight end and quarterback. I mean, obviously that's it. I think wide out would be good, adding one guy to the room on the outside especially. Griffin is obviously a good shot. Brooks, those guys are all there, but do we need someone else on top of that? But yeah, I mean, I think that we're going to need bodies to fit this system, but it all starts with the quarterback. I mean, it just does. There's very, very unlikely that Carter Smith is going to be the guy next year. Obviously, he's not. The question is, can Mabry? I mean, will he be a potential starter? That's really the big question. But ultimately, they're still bringing somebody in. You're bringing someone in, whether Locke is there or not, whether Mabry's or not. You're still bringing another body in. It's got to be an established quarterback who can fit this system. And now they've got time to do that, right? Because you've got the offensive coordinator. You know what you're looking for. You've just got to get someone out there to bring in to fill that role.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to get us a couple questions in here. Greg Linscomb asked, does this look similar to when Barry tried the spread offense with little success and then returned to ground, pound, and play action?
I mean, this is the spread. This is a power spread offense that he's running. Kind of. I don't want to say that Longo's scheme couldn't work. I think that Longo didn't work here. And I think that that's where people need to kind of, there's a little bit of a disconnect there. I don't want to say that an entire style of offense or scheme of offense just can't work at Wisconsin. What happens is you have to also have the right person, establishing it and being able to put their touch on it. And Longo clearly wasn't the right guy here. So I think that this is it's more grounded in, I've seen things where people say, well, this was him making this transition as him saying that the air raid can't work here. I don't agree with that. I think my perspective on it is Fickell is going to something that he's more comfortable with, simply because he was like, if I'm going to make a change, I'm going to make a change with my career on the line to something that I know and feel comfortable with whoever's going to be running it, that they're going to be running something that I have had success with before.
Yeah, very similar to Ohio State. It's very similar to when we talked about that, Justin. We said we wanted someone to bring in an Ohio State. Yeah, power spread is something you've been mentioning for a while. Our good friend of the show, KPB, says, here's my question for Justin. I'm concerned that Grimes will be the Greg Gard of football. Justin, why am I wrong?
Well, for number one, he does not have the level of control over the football team in general, but he's a very creative coach. Here's what I'll say. If you're looking for him as a recruiter, there are very few OCs that are out there that actually are heavy recruiters. They're guys that may close the deal on somebody, but let's be honest, with this staff, that's Fickell. If you're bringing somebody in to close the door and lock a player down, it's going to be Luke Fickell. It's not going to be the OC. The OC is going to be probably put into the recruiting branch as somebody who's going to help the quarterback coach identify who they're going to go after. And my guess is you'll probably have somebody younger that's going to be at the quarterback coach position, that they're going to be kind of your hunting dog to go out there and do the legwork for better or worse for the wide receiver recruiting. Offensively, I just think that, listen, there's going to be people that won't do the legwork and look into Grimes as a coach. He's a good coach. The guy has been very effective -1. Like, I looked at the last 5 years, bar Kansas being 29.7, he was over 30 points per game every year except for the year of 23 at Baylor, where they had a combination of poor transfers and young offensive linemen that were tasked with taking over the offensive line. The offense really struggled. They were a yard less per carry than the prior season, and they were 34 sacks during that season. That to me just says that the offensive line was a train wreck, and that he just struggled to be able to keep people able to run it with any level of effectiveness because the offensive line couldn't execute.
Yeah. So obviously we are going to need to bring in that QB coach quickly because let's be honest, we have to focus on the quarterback, and I want the QB coach to be heavily involved in that. There's a couple questions about realistic portal QBs out there. I haven't done enough research on who's out there to actually.
Do you think that they're going to have a say in that? Because I don't necessarily think they will. I think that Grimes is going to be the one that kind of gives this is the guy we're going to go. And the quarterback coach, to me, effectively is somebody like almost like the running back coach, where he's going to be the guy that's just he's going to do the teaching. Like, Grimes is going to say, this is the guy I want. But when it comes to all the fundamentals and actual technique work, that's going to be tasked with whoever the QB coach is. And
but certainly
the bulk of the recruiting probably will, but I think it's going to be mostly decided on by Grimes. I
agree. I think Grimes and Fickell will do that deciding, but I do think that if they bring in a QB coach and they announce who that person is going to be, I think that you certainly can. There's existing relationships and potentially things that can help you out with that. A couple more questions here before we move on. Bourbon and Bass asked, what kind of tempo will the Badgers offense have? How does it fit with the type of defensive schemes Fickell wants to employ? So first of all, the one thing about tempo, and I wanted to bring this up because it's not the Phil Longo tempo. This is not, it's definitely,
but he will use
it. It's pro style. They're going to huddle a lot. They will use tempo if they need to, but this is not a tempo offense. And honestly, I'm okay with it. I know that tempo is one of those things that people just love to talk about, and people love tempo, and that's fine. But it's just, for me, like, I don't want to put our defense in situations where they've just come off the field and all of a sudden we're a quick 3 and out, and then all of a sudden they're back out there. I'm okay being more deliberate, slowing the pace of the game down, limiting the offensive possessions of the other team. Ultimately, if we're going to run the ball effectively, we are going to shorten the game, right? Simply because the clock's going to run more. And I don't have a problem with that. I think that if we can, because I think we are going to be more efficient offensively. And if we're more efficient offensively, we don't need to have as many drives, and we can actually limit the other offensive possessions. So I'm okay with the tempo issue. Are you wishing it was a more tempo? Are you okay with the fact that it's not going to be as tempo as Longo?
No, I'm fine. I'm totally fine with it. See, one thing I will say about him is he actively will, if he feels like the defense is getting on their heels, then he'll go tempo to attack a defense that he feels is kind of going on tilt. And that, to me, is just smart coaching. Like if you feel like the defense is kind of getting thrown off, absolutely start attacking them. And he does a really nice job of that. He's not a guy that's going to be like Paul Christ and we're just going to milk play clock. He just runs his plays. Like there may be 15, 20 seconds on the clock yet when he runs it. If the play is in and he's ready to go, he'll go. But he's not going to be a guy who's going to sprint to the line and get, moving down the field. There's going to be more run. That's something I will tell you right now is going to be more of a focal point. A lot of his passing game is predicated off of the run game.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Danimal 1965 says more motion, sweeps, outside, inside zone, screens, pound it, and take shots over the top. Yes, very much so.
Absolutely.
P asks, can Grimes recruit though? Justin, what's your take on the recruiting that you've done research on?
He's a solid recruiter. I don't think he's going to be a negative, but I also don't think he's going to be tasked with a whole lot. Like I think he's going to be more helping establish the recruiting boards. A lot of the position coaches will be the guys doing most of the lead recruiting. He's probably going to be like one of the leads with the quarterback recruiting. But I think you're probably, like I said, you're going to have young blood that's probably going to help with that. But I don't think he's going to be a negative there. And I do think that we will be able to bring in quality QBs. It'll be really interesting to see what he looks for in a QB. It does appear that he really likes mobility. And I think that really aids his offense in terms of being able to make it more dynamic. So I am looking forward to seeing who he targets this next cycle.
Yeah, mobility is critical. And if you look at Ohio State's offenses that they've run for several years, which again, a very similar style. I'm not saying we have the athletes that they do, but their quarterback, as I've said many times on this show, uses space, uses pocket presence, uses the ability to move to create more passing lanes, keeps their eyes downfield. The mobility isn't necessarily a super active, high-powered quarterback run game, but it's that ability to create more offense through using his legs. And that is something that we absolutely need, which, by the way, Locke simply could not do, right? Tanner Mordecai was able to do it a little bit more last year, and Tyler Van Dyke to a very small extent this year.
Tanner would be a good fit in this offense.
Tanner, Tanner definitely would be. Bo Dragon says, I don't give a F about scheme. You need a pro talent quarterback. Yeah. Look, obviously we need a quarterback to make this offense better, Bo. I completely agree with that. However, what I would say is if the running game is better and if we have a more high floor offense, because let's face it, we're not always going to have a pro quarterback with us, we can be better with what we already have. So I guess what I'm saying is this: if this is the offense we would have had all this year, and if he would have been our offensive coordinator from a couple years ago, we would have been better off this year than we were. Even with
absolutely.
I'm not saying it would have been amazing, but our inability to really establish the run and control the clock the way that we always have absolutely caused us to be as poor as we were offensively. What do we average? 23 points a game again? That's ridiculous. Like we can't do that. It's nuts. Question from the earlier that I Ryan Willie says, do you think Fickell survives next year if they don't make it to a bowl? Or is Fickell saved by one of the most difficult schedules in the country?
I actually think that if they can get, and I'm actually more concerned about the defense after this hire. I think the offense will be a good bit better. I don't know what the numbers are going to be on that, but I do think it's going to be much more effective than what we saw. And if that's the case, then I look at it and will the defense be able to make timely stops when they need to? Because it is a tough schedule. But I watched this offense basically make Illinois super frustrated on defense because they couldn't stop it. This offense stopped itself effectively against Illinois. I know they lost the game, but they didn't lose it to like the last 2 minutes. And the year before, they dropped like almost 40 on them. So this is an offense that if it's run effectively, I think we'll really see a step up in terms of what we saw this prior year. It's just from a scheme standpoint and what we actually have on the roster, it's so much better with than what we were running. Like their offensive line is they're probably going to love this compared to what we were doing. And it's just going to be much more difficult to key on things if you're a team like Iowa or Minnesota or Illinois in terms of what he wants to do offensively than what Longo was.
You brought up the defense, so let's talk about it a bit. GPA says, what are we doing about DC? Seems like there would have been movement and announcement by now if they were bringing in a new play caller. No? You obviously have a lot of thoughts on Tressel and whether or not he needs to be there. But I mean, are you okay with him staying? Do you feel like he needs to have a change and have a demotion or whatever the case is?
I never want to see a coach lose their job, but I question whether they'll be able to cause enough disruption in this scheme, even if they go heavier. You're going to have a lot of young guys that you're going to be using this next year, most likely on defense. And if that's the case, I'm a little concerned about if the sack numbers and tackle for loss numbers are still going to be as problematic as they were. And I think we're going to be in trouble if that's the case, because I do think that we're going to have games where we just wear down, or we're going to have games like Iowa and Minnesota where teams just run over us. And the other teams in this league are going to adjust to that. Like, it wouldn't shock me. Oregon's not going to have Gabriel this next year. It wouldn't shock me to see them just try to run it down our throat like everybody else has. Why bother throwing if you can just get away with running the football every time?
And that's ultimately the key is, and I said this last week, I think QB and defensive line, open up the checkbooks. Like, to me, that is where everything is. Obviously, I mentioned tight end earlier on the offensive side, but total for this team, defensive line and QB. And defensive line, I think Justin actually makes Tressel's system work. If you put in a bigger, stronger Keanu Benton type players, I know it's not Keanu Benton, but like that type of a guy, you put a couple of those guys in the front, it allows our edge rushers, it allows the linebackers to make those disruptive plays. Now, they still have to be talented enough to do it, but we feel pretty good about guys like Allegro and guys we have coming in, Heiberger we haven't seen this year. Like, there are guys on the roster that we feel like can be disruptive, but none of that disruption happens if you don't have the defensive line. And that's ultimately it. Now, again, recruiting better, right? We just talked about Xavier Akpanu. We talked about Drayden Pavey, so those guys are coming. But right away, though, I mean, we're gonna need to get that in the transfer portal, because without that, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Justin, before we're gonna talk a little bit of basketball, but any other thing on football as far as the Grimes hire? We've talked a lot about him today. Anything else that you want to touch on with Grimes before we move on to basketball?
No, I think we've pretty much got it covered. I mean, we're kind of in wait and see mode at this point. Like, I'm not going to blow smoke on people and tell them that this is going to be like the greatest offense ever. Right now, it's a matter of, can he get in here and get to work and get this functional and able to be what we need it for this coming season? Because he's going to have to hit the ground running. Like, they're going to have to get this thing clicking quickly, because that schedule is going to be daunting. Now, I do think some of those teams will take a step back, but it's still going to have to be a good offense. Like, we're not going to be able to get by scoring 23 points a game. It's just not going to work.
And the ability to run the ball better, more effectively, using all the things we've talked about already today with Yakimelli and Dupree and wide zones and various things, that should raise the floor of next year. It should be able to say, okay, like, I know the schedule's hard, but we have to be better, and we should be able to do that, because ultimately we are a running back school. We are a running school. We need to do that. We have to get back to it. I understand air raid was enticing to everybody, and we knew we were gonna still run the ball with air raid, but it didn't work on all the levels of Phil Longo, and this is a change that was needed. And I think the initial thought was people saw the name and they were like, oh, they were underwhelmed. And I get it. I understand the feeling of being underwhelmed. But when you watch what he's done and you see what's out there, I mean, again, I'm an optimist, so I'm always going to look for the positive and everything. And I can see that. I can see a floor-raising type offensive coordinator, which I'm perfectly fine with. And if that means sacrificing ceiling, I'm okay with that. Like, I'm all about that high floor, and I think that's what he brings. But yes, more to come. We're going to be talking about this in future weeks a lot, obviously, as a QB coach, and of course the transfer portal is about to come open and start all that madness. So there's going to be a lot that we're going to kind of break down as things go on. But let's shift gears to the Marquette game a bit yesterday. Yikes, Justin! 2 straight losses in a row now to Michigan and Marquette. Not to mention the next 2 games the Badgers have are at Illinois and Indianapolis against Butler. 2 very difficult teams. At Illinois, Purdue. Those are the guys that are going to challenge for the Big Ten Conference, hopefully along with us, maybe Michigan. Michigan's much better than I think people think they are. But the Marquette game yesterday, and I'm just going to start here, and then I'll turn it over to you. I was very frustrated, obviously, watching that game. Glad that Klesmit got his, and he came back in. He shot the ball very well. But ultimately, Tanjay got in foul trouble. That really hurt us. But it all comes down to 2 things. It's turnovers and defense. My God, we turned the ball over 16 times to their 5. And it seems like every time in the second half, Justin, that we ever had any momentum, it was just give the ball to Jones. He'll just have a coffee, mosey through the lane, and have a finger roll layup. Just seemingly uncontested. And frankly, I don't like that. And I'd much rather go back to a time when Bo Ryan was still here, we were playing better team defense, where if someone gets in the lane, you collapse on them. You make him kick it out. I will give someone a wide open 3 all day than just constantly having the dribble penetration that just eats through our defense like butter, like a knife through butter, and then they're just getting layups. It was the first half, I thought, layup and open 3, seemingly every time up the floor. I was very frustrated by the defense, and it's something that, look, I still like this team, and there's a lot to like about it. But boy, if we are going to be like this defensively and let people get all the shots they want, Justin, we're not going to win a lot of games, and this is difficult.
Well, and it's one of the things we've been talking about for a while. There's a lack of interior defense that keeps anyone at bay. There's no rim protection, and we've talked about that for like 3 years now. Like you have nobody that's going to block a shot. You have nobody that's going to cut off penetration, and that's basically what happened. Like they just, once they beat their initial man, it was just get to the rim, and that's going to be a problem for this team probably all season, because it's not like it went away in prior years. What we're going to have to hope is that we're able to mitigate it enough that we can still win games and do it against most of the teams that aren't to Marquette's level.
I mean, yeah, and now Marquette is a top 5 team, and they're going to drop a little bit because they did lose last week. So they're still a really good team that's going to be a potential. Like they're certainly a Sweet 16 type, Elite 8 type of a team, and they're good. The Joplin played great yesterday. Jones played great, but it just seems like, I mean, we have to be better than that. Like it's that I know, and we knew that the front court defense was bad. We knew that, but that doesn't mean that the team that then we need to adjust, and we need to have more sets where we can actually collapse more on the defense. And I wish Ryan was still on the show. I wanted to talk to him specifically about this, but I think that there's just so much more we can do, and we need to do. I give Gard credit for his changes he made offensively, and we are a better offensive team. There's no doubt about that. Now, when Tanjay's not in there, we struggled a bit yesterday. We struggled quite a bit. And Blackwell didn't have a good game. Crowd didn't have a good game. We just didn't have guys that had good games. And that's 2 in a row now where you're like, boy, we just didn't play that well. And we shot better yesterday than we did in the Michigan game. We still couldn't get over the hump. And it's creating issues. The one player I will say that I'm going to give some flowers to, Carter Gilmore. Look, for all the things we say about Carter Gilmore on this show, Carter Gilmore took a step. And you can't say that about a lot of people on this roster. Obviously, you can about Blackwell. There's others. But he took a step. He knew that he couldn't shoot, so he cleaned up his shot. Now he's continuing to drain threes to make any, but he's shooting when he's open, which helps spread the floor. He plays with insane tenacity and effort on the boards, on defense. And I have to say, you know what? I'm happy that he's getting the minutes that he is, and he can get a little more as far as I'm concerned, because Carter Gilmore has earned his playing time.
Yeah. You know, sadly, I know there was an inside joke. I'm wondering where the headband went, but
country club.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I mean, we know what Carter is as a player. The thing for him would always simply be is, can he hit the open looks that he's being given? If he's capable of doing some of that, then he's a fine player. He's solid defensively. He's a guy who plays really hard. There's not a lot of times that you see guys that take stupid shots. Carter doesn't normally do that. He's normally wide open if he actually puts it up. So I like seeing a guy who continues to put in effort and continues to try to better himself. And I will absolutely give him credit that he's somebody who has worked over the course of his career to get to the point that we're at. And he's provided some valuable minutes. At some point, hopefully we can get we're not necessarily have to rely as much on walk-ons, but it's good to see him be able to come in and be productive for us and make plays for this team, because they need it. Front court is still thin.
It's extremely thin. Thoughts on John Tanjay? I want to talk about John Tanjay for a minute. Look, he had a bad game yesterday because he had foul trouble, but he's obviously, when he's off the floor, we're not nearly as good.
He manufactures so much of his own offense.
I mean, he absolutely does. KPB actually writes, was at the game. I know he's a Marquette fan too. This is not good. Even when Tanjay was in there, he was not drawing as many fouls as early in the season. This will continue in Big Ten play. This is kind of why I put this up there, because I wanted to talk about this a little bit. I'm all about John Tanjay. I think he's a star of the team. He's going to be huge. I do sometimes get some of the things that frustrated me, and Ryan and I have gone back and forth about this, that frustrated me about Johnny Davis, because there were things that frustrated me about Johnny Davis, and I was probably lower on him than anyone else. But some of those things I see in Tanjay, and that, yes, he's trying to create, but he's a little bit too out of control too often. And instead of, like, maybe you do need to stop and pop on some of those and change things up a little bit. And I know he's going hard, and I appreciate that. He turned the ball over a couple times yesterday. He was out of control, because if he doesn't get the whistle, the ball's going the other way and we don't get a shot. And that's the thing that's frustrating to me. And Kevin brings this up.
He forces some things, trying to get contact and get fouls.
And I appreciate the aggressiveness, and I don't want him to be any less aggressive. I know it's important that we have that, and I'm all about it. But when you watch Blackwell, when he does that, he's a bit more in control, and sometimes he makes the smarter decision. And sometimes Tanjay, I feel like, doesn't always make the smartest decision when he is trying to create. Again, I appreciate the creativity, and I want that to continue. But Blackwell's a bit more refined in that regard. He's just not as talented necessarily as Tanjay. But I feel like that needs to balance out a little bit, because you saw that as with guys like, Johnny Davis will mention, and Alondo Tucker used to be like that. We just went a little bit too out of control. So I do hope that Tanjay reins it in just a little bit and can be a bit more deliberate with what he's doing, and sometimes take the shot, because guess what? You're a good shooter. And that's okay too. So if you can create and hit a jumper, a mid-range jumper, do that. And I understand he's trying to get fouled. I appreciate that. But at some point, that's going to come back to bite us.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. He's a good enough scorer that he has a variety of ways he can do it. Stop trying to force penetration and getting fouled at the rim when it's not there. Because there's going to be times, especially in the Big Ten, where the refs are going to swallow their whistle a little bit more. And you want to get a productive, possession each time. That's not necessarily going to be there if you continue to get too aggressive and try to force things. Keep moving the ball. We did a really good job of passing earlier in the season than some of our other games. It seems like we've kind of gotten away from that and leaned on Blackwell and Tanjay in terms of how they manufacture offense, rather than just kind of having everybody flow.
A few comments up here. We're going to talk about this guy. Alien Space says they need Amos to step up. Bo Dragon, Amos is a failed experiment. Steve Kneebone, Amos looks lost. Let's talk about him. I mean, Amos, obviously, we thought he would be better, and he's not, and he hasn't really contributed much, truthfully, at all on this team. And we've just talked about front court. We've talked about the lack of depth. This was a guy that was going to bring us a little bit more depth at the 4 position. We thought he was going to start, and then all of a sudden Winter is starting. Thoughts on what you've seen out of him so far, and do you think he can improve, or do you think this is pretty much this is what we have?
He feels a little bit like a one-on-one player to me. Like he just doesn't flow within the offense. It's like I watch him and I'm waiting for him to kind of be cohesive like everybody else is when they're running offense, and it just feels like he's kind of like everybody else has been practicing for a week and he came in, like, missed the week because he was sick or something, and is trying to jump in and run plays without actually knowing what they're doing. Like he's just from a mental standpoint, he's just a guy that just seems to struggle a little bit, and Marcus Ilver has a little bit of it too, where you're watching him out there and he tends to float around and you're like, I don't know if this guy totally knows what's going on. I think he'll get better with time. I just don't know what the ceiling is there.
I thought Ryan was going to come back, but now it looks like he's not going to come back. He just closed out of his window that was down there open for a while.
Mm-hmm.
It's frustrating because I was really hoping that he was going to be we thought he was going to start at the 4 and be someone that could provide some offense, and he still can. I think there's still going to be a game where he's going to be needed to come in there and he's going to make an impact. But he's not like a big body that can really do anything. He doesn't add any sort of interior defense to our system at all, which is frustrating. So we have 2 games, Justin, that are coming up at Illinois and at Butler. I mean, gosh, if we lose them both and we go on a 4-game losing streak, that is a rough way to start the Big Ten play and to have any kind of confidence that we're going to actually be able to be effective, right, going forward, because that's not good.
Yeah, I the way I look at it, I think we go 1-1.
I hope so.
We probably lose to Illinois and win against Butler would be my guess as to how this plays out.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to beat Illinois over Butler just because it's a Big Ten game. Like we don't want to be 0-2 now. We started with two really tough.
Illinois is the better team.
Yeah, I mean, we started with 2 tough Big Ten games, but 0-2 in conference is not really the way we want to start off. And so I'm really hoping we can get that done. But that's going to be that's a tough place to play. I mean, Illinois is a very, very difficult place to play. And I don't see us going in there and winning. I'd see us winning at Butler. I mean, we're not playing at Hinkle. We're playing in where the Pacers play. But still, that's a game I feel like we could win. Either way, it's gonna be tough. But yeah, not exactly the start that we were hoping for. After the 8-0 start, like a couple hiccups, we need to turn it around quickly and get back in the win column to get confidence going into the Big Ten season. Yeah. That'll do it for the show today. A lot of good talk about Grimes. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Appreciate that. Justin, final thoughts before we close the show.
Well, we have a direction we're headed. Now it's just a matter of getting to work, and winter conditioning will start in about a month. So Wisconsin gets an opportunity to kind of start rebuilding themselves at that point. Hopefully we find some good pickups. The portal should be opening this week. We can start to find out who some of the new pieces are going to be for this next year. I just hope we make some good decisions, and I know people are going to want to spend money for names. Just find quality is the way I look at it. Just find guys who can go out there and be effective for you. Doesn't necessarily have to be name brand guys. You just have to find guys that want to come in and work and play hard.
Sometimes you need bodies in the room. Sometimes you really need super quality. And yeah, you're absolutely right. We've got bodies in a lot of these rooms. We got to have quality that can complement what this team does. This starts the offseason of Fickell's career at this point. I mean, this is going to define what he does going forward. I mean, if Fickell has aspirations of eventually being the coach at Ohio State, he has to succeed at Wisconsin in order to make that happen. You know, there's a lot of things riding on this season, and former players, fans, donors, there's a lot of anxiety around this football program right now, which we've talked about a lot. And that anxiety is not going away. That anxiety is still here, and it's still going to be there until he shows it on the field. There's not a lot of anxiety in the recruiting. Rightfully so, because he's done well there. But this now has to translate. We're 2 years in. I know the schedule's hard, and the question earlier was about bowl game and all that stuff. Look, at the end of the day, we're gonna know, because it's not like the record has to get a ton better. It's not. If 7-5 would be great next year, given our schedule. It's about how we play. Yeah, how we play when we play the bottom of the Big Ten. How we compete with the top.
We need to look like we can compete. We had too many games this year where it's just like we didn't look like we belonged. And I'm talking about Nebraska, I'm talking about Minnesota and Iowa. Those 3 games shaped our season, and we looked like we didn't belong on the field with 3 teams that we have, up until a few years ago, dominated, other than Iowa.
And it absolutely, it has to happen. The rivalry games were 0-3 this year, but Jeff Grimes is a start. Returning to Wisconsin's identity is a start. So let's build on that now. Let's get a QB coach. Let's get a QB. Let's get tight ends. Let's get defensive linemen. Let's honestly turn this into what we fans are hoping for, because we have a lot of months now to simply think about and fantasize about what this team can actually be. And hopefully it can get done with the new offensive coordinator. With that, we will be back again next week on Wisconsin.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoy the show, subscribe to our YouTube channel at The Bucky Report or The Bucky Report Podcast from wherever you get your content. Until next time, on Wisconsin.